The shuttle bay was a monument to cold efficiency, every surface a dull, non-reflective gray, every line perfectly straight. Leo felt the vibration of the docking clamps through the soles of his boots, a final, mechanical sigh before the silence swallowed everything. The air smelled recycled, sterile, and carried a faint metallic tang. As the hatch hissed open, he adjusted the simple satchel on his shoulder, its fabric worn soft from travel, a stark contrast to the unforgiving environment. He was met by a single figure, tall and unnervingly still. The Xylos officer wore a form-fitting uniform of the same muted gray, his posture so perfect it seemed engineered rather than learned. His eyes, a pale, luminous silver, scanned Leo without a flicker of emotion. "I am Kellen, strategic logistician, 3rd tier," the officer said. His voice was calm, level, devoid of any inflection that might suggest warmth or welcome. "You are the human representative designated for the serious border demarcation talks, Leo," he replied, offering a small, genuine smile. "Cultural liaison and conflict de-escalation specialist. It's a pleasure to meet you, Kellen." Kellen's head tilted a precise fraction of a degree. "Your title is not listed in our preliminary briefings. We anticipated a military cartographer or a territorial jurist. That's the idea," Leo said, his smile not fading. "Sometimes a different perspective helps untangle a knot. Knots are untangled by following the thread to its origin, not by introducing new variables," Kellen stated, turning on his heel. This way, he led Leo through corridors that were identical in their stark perfection. Other Xylos passed them, moving with the same fluid, efficient grace, their silver eyes fixed ahead. There was no chatter, no laughter, not even the sound of casual footsteps. It was a society built on pure, unadulterated logic, and Leo felt the weight of its silence pressing in on him. The meeting room was a circle, with a central holodeble displaying a stark map of the border zone. 5 other Xylos officials were present, including an older individual with a more intricate pattern on his collar, whom Kellen addressed as Preceptor Valerius. They all looked at Leo with the same dispassionate curiosity one might afford a strange insect. "The discrepancy is 7.3 kilometrics of asteroid field," Preceptor Valerius began, his voice like grinding stones. "Our scans from Cycle 84 point to confirm the alignment with the Vega Accord. Your human vessels have been operated outside the agreed corridor." Leo listened, nodding. The issue was minor, a bureaucratic snag, but the Xylos treated it with the gravity of a declaration of war. As they presented their data, a wall of flawless logic and impeccable records, Leo found his mind wandering. He watched their faces, saw no frustration, no impatience, only a cold dedication to the facts. It was, in its own way, beautiful. A perfectly calibrated machine dot, and then a memory surfaced. A song his grandmother used to sing while tending her garden on Mars, a simple, meandering tune about the morning dew. Without thinking, lost for a moment in that warmer, softer memory, he began to hum it. The sound was barely audible, a soft, breathy vibration in his throat. The effect was instantaneous. The preceptor stopped speaking. Kellen, who had been inputting data into the holodeble, froze, his fingers hovering over the interface. All 6 pairs of silver eyes were locked on him. The silence in the room was no longer just empty. It was shocked, thick with a confusion so profound it was almost tactile. "What was that?" Preceptor Valerius asked, his grinding voice now sharp with something Leo couldn't identify. Not anger, alarm. Leo blinked. "I'm sorry, the acoustic anomaly you produced. It was non-uniform. It served no communicative purpose that we can discern." I was humming," Leo said, feeling a flush of heat in his cheeks. "A song. A piece of music." "Music." Kellen repeated the word as if tasting something foreign. "This is a human data processing function." "Not exactly. It's an expression. It can convey feeling, memory. It doesn't always have a purpose beyond being pleasant." The Xylos looked at each other. Pleasant. The concept seemed as alien to them as their silence was to him. The meeting continued, but the atmosphere had shifted. The Xylos were distracted, their perfect focus broken. Kellen, in particular, kept glancing at Leo, his analytical gaze now tinged with a deep, unsettling curiosity. He had spent his life categorizing the universe into data points and logical sequences. But this human, this soft, illogical sound, it was an uncalculated variable, and for the first time in his existence, Kellen found himself unable to compute. The silence in Leo's quarters was absolute. It was a different quality of silence than the one on a human ship, which was always filled with the subtle hum of life support, the distant murmur of voices, the sense of a living, breathing entity around you. This was the silence of a tomb, a void so complete it felt heavy. Leo sat on the edge of his austerely functional bunk, the events of the meeting replaying in his mind. Their reaction hadn't been hostile, merely profoundly disoriented, as if he'd suddenly started speaking in a language made of color instead of sound. A soft chime, toneless and efficient, broke the stillness. The door slid open to reveal Kellen, standing with the same impeccable posture as before. His silver eyes took in the room, the single bag Leo had yet to unpack. The way Leo was simply sitting, doing nothing productive. "Your presence is required for a continuation of the analysis," Kellen stated. "The preceptor has assigned me to catalog your methods." "My methods?" Leo asked, standing and stretching, a casual movement that made Kellen's eyes track him with renewed focus. The incident of the humming caused a measurable drop in cognitive focus among the delegation. "It is being treated as a potential non-auditory psychological tool. I am to determine its parameters and function." Leo almost laughed but swallowed it. To them, he was a weapon being reverse-engineered. "So, you're my minder?" "I am your analyst," Kellen corrected, his tone leaving no room for ambiguity. "You will proceed with your standard procedures." With a shrug, Leo reached into his satchel and pulled out a small, leather-bound sketchbook and a stick of charcoal. He moved to the desk, its surface a blank, gray slate, and opened the book. Kellen watched, motionless, as Leo's hand began to move across the page, not in precise lines, but in soft, sweeping smudges. "What is the function of this activity?" Kellen asked after a long minute of watching the meaningless marks accumulate. "It's a drawing." "A sketch," Leo said, not looking up. "I'm drawing you." This seemed to startle the Xylos. "A redundant action. My visual data is already recorded in your memory and by the ship's internal sensors. Creating a low-fidelity static image serves no logical purpose. It's not about recording data." Leo explained, his voice soft as he worked. "It's about interpretation. It's about the feeling of the lines, the way the light catches the angle of your jaw. See?" He turned the book around. Kylie and looked at the drawing. It was him, undeniably, but it was not a perfect, photographic reproduction. The lines were rough, expressive. The shading was heavy in places, suggesting a depth and shadow the room's flat. Even lighting did not possess. The eyes, especially, held a weight the charcoal should not have been able to convey. It was an image full of feeling. It was an impression, not a record. "This is an inefficient system," Kellen said, though he did not look away from the page. "The data is imprecise, is it?" Leo asked gently. "Does it look like you?" Kellen was silent for a long moment. "The resemblance is recognizable." Later, as Kellen escorted him to the mess hall, they passed a young Xylos who was meticulously polishing a section of bulkhead. The Xylos, a female with the same silver eyes but a slightly less rigid posture, glanced up as they passed. Her eyes flickered from Kellen to Leo, and for a fraction of a second, her polishing rhythm hitched. Leo offered her the same small, warm smile he had given Kellen. Her head dipped almost imperceptibly, a gesture so small it could have been a trick of the light, before she returned to her work with renewed intensity. "Who was that?" Leo asked once they were out of earshot. "Designation Jorah. She is a data sifter, 4th tier. Her function is to process low-priority sensor logs," Kellen replied, his voice flat. "Why do you ask?" "No reason. She just seemed curious." "Curiosity is an illogical distraction from assigned functions," Kellen stated, but Leo noticed the way his own eyes narrowed slightly, as if filing the observation away as another anomalous data point. In the mess hall, the Xylos consumed nutrient paste from identical containers, their movements synchronized and efficient. Leo took his own container and sat, the bland, utilitarian taste a stark contrast to the vibrant, Chaotic flavors of Earth. He watched Jorah from across the room. She was eating alone, her eyes downcast. As Leo observed, he saw her left hand, hidden in her lap, was moving. She was tracing a small, repetitive pattern on her thigh. It was a tiny, secret rebellion against the uniformity. In that moment, an idea sparked in Leo's mind. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, smooth river stone he always carried, its surface worn by millennia of water. He waited until Jorah looked up, and then, with a deliberate slowness, he placed it on the table between them. He didn't look at her, didn't smile. He simply left it there, a single, natural, imperfect object in a sea of manufactured perfection. When he and Kellen left the hall, Leo glanced back. Jorah was still sitting there, but her eyes were fixed on the stone, her food forgotten. Her fingers, still hidden, had stopped their tracing. That night, in his quarters, Kellen stood before the preceptor. Valerius's crystalline form seemed to absorb the light. Your report, logistician. The human's activities are consistent with what he terms art and expression. They are inefficient, illogical, and serve no discernible strategic purpose. However, Kellen hesitated, a flaw in his normally flawless reporting. Continue. They have a measurable effect. The data sifter Jorah exhibited a 0.08% decrease in polishing efficiency after visual contact with the human. She was later observed fixating on an inert geological sample he presented. Contamination. Preceptor Valerius said, the word dripping with cold disdain. This is the danger of illogical variables. They introduce chaos. You are to continue your analysis, Kellen, but your primary objective is now to contain this resonance of chaos. We must understand it to neutralize it. Back in his own sparse chamber, Kellen accessed the ship's visual logs. He pulled up the image of the sketch Leo had made of him. He stared at the rough, smudged lines, at the eyes that looked back at him with a depth he himself had never perceived. For the first time, the silence of his own mind felt different. It was no longer peaceful. It was empty, and the memory of that soft, meandering hum, the feeling of the charcoal on the page, were echoes beginning to fill it. The preceptor's directive to contain the resonance was a logical imperative, and Kellen approached it with his usual meticulous precision. His new strategy was one of deep immersion. He requested Leo's presence in the observational deck, a room with a vast, transparent wall looking out onto the swirling violet and cobalt nebula. That marked the disputed border. The logic was sound. The sheer scale of the cosmos often provided a stabilizing perspective for troubled logic centers. Explain it to me, Kellen began, standing rigidly as Leo leaned against the viewport, his posture infuriatingly relaxed. The purpose of these feelings, they are a variable that cannot be quantified. How does your species function with such chaotic internal data streams? Leo watched the cosmic dust dance, lit by the light of a distant, dying star. We don't function in spite of them, Kellen. We function because of them. Logic tells you not to run into a burning building. Emotion is why someone does it anyway, to save another. That is an illogical risk-reward calculation. The probability of saving one life does not outweigh the high probability of losing your own. It does if you love them, Leo said softly, turning to face him. The nebula's light painted soft colors on his human features. Kellen's data streams stuttered. Love. The word was in his lexicon, a biological imperative for species propagation. But the way Leo used it, it was something else, a force. Love is a chemical state designed to ensure offspring viability, is it? Leo pushed away from the viewport and took a step closer. The movement was not threatening, but it was intimate, violating the standard Xylos personal buffer zone. Kellen did not retreat, a fact his own internal monitors registered as anomalous. What about the love for a friend? For a piece of music? For a memory? What about the love for something so beautiful it hurts? He gestured to the nebula. Does your logic tell you why that sight is beautiful? Beauty is an inefficient term. It is a pattern of light and gas that makes you feel small and insignificant, and yet somehow a part of something magnificent all at the same time. Leo finished for him. That's the feeling. That's the flaw in your algorithm. You can describe the data, but you can't experience the meaning. Kellen was silent, his silver eyes reflecting the swirling cosmos. He had no counter-argument. Leo's words were not built on logic, but on a foundation he was beginning to recognize was just as real, just as powerful. It was a terrifying and exhilarating revelation. Their sessions continued, moving from the observational deck to the quiet of Leo's quarters. They were no longer analyst and subject. They were two minds from different universes, meeting in a fragile, neutral space. Leo spoke of sacrifice, of his sister who had given her seat on an evacuation shuttle to a stranger during the lunar colony breach. He spoke of grief, a raw, aching thing that had no productive output. He spoke of joy, so bright and expansive it felt like it could power a starship. One evening, Leo was attempting to explain the concept of a hug, a non-verbal gesture of comfort and support. Kellen listened, his head tilted. The transfer of body heat and pressure is an inefficient method for raising morale. Verbal reassurance or a solution-oriented directive would be more effective. It's not about efficiency, Leo said, a faint smile on his lips. It's about connection. It's about telling someone they aren't alone in the universe without using words. He stood in, moving slowly, giving Kellen every opportunity to withdraw. He raised his arms. May I demonstrate? Every protocol, every logical circuit in Kellen's mind screamed a warning. This was physical contact, unregulated, unpredictable, a massive variable. But another part of him, the part that had stared at the sketch and listened to the stories of sacrifice, was deeply, illogically curious. He gave a single, sharp nod. Leo stepped forward and wrapped his arms around Kellen's rigid frame. For a moment, it was exactly as Kellen had predicted, an inefficient transfer of warmth and pressure. Then, something shifted. He felt the steady, rhythmic beat of Leo's heart against his own chest, a rhythm out of sync with his own calm, regulated pulse. He felt the slight give of the human's body, the soft exhalation of breath near his ear. It was not an attack. It was not a tool. It was an offering, a shared silence that was the exact opposite of the cold silence of his ship. This silence was warm and alive. The moment stretched, lasting several seconds longer than was logically necessary for a demonstration. When Leo finally stepped back, his eyes held a question Kellen had no data to answer. Neither of them had noticed the almost imperceptible shift in the ambient lighting in the room, a subtle change that occurred only during a Level 1 security scan. Preceptor Valerius watched the sensor log in his chamber, the cold light of the screen glinting off his crystalline form, the thermal readings, the prolonged physical contact, the elevated biometrics from Kellen that could not be attributed to stress or alarm. It all painted a clear and horrifying picture. The human was not just a contaminant. He was a corrosive agent, and he was targeting one of their most promising logisticians. The preceptor's long, sharp fingers tapped a command into his console. The image of Leo and Kellen in that quiet, transformative embrace froze on the screen. The variable has become a threat, Valerius murmured to the empty room, his voice like grinding ice. Containment has failed. A new directive is required. The flaw was no longer in the algorithm. The flaw was in the heart of his subordinate, and it was a flaw that, by the strict, unbending laws of the Xylos Empire, required immediate and absolute correction. The summons to Preceptor Valerius's chamber was not a chime, but a sharp, resonant pulse that vibrated through the very deck plates. Kellen, who had been sitting perfectly still in his quarters attempting to process the chaotic data stream of the hug, felt it like a physical blow. He knew that signal. It was reserved for critical security breaches and disciplinary actions. When he entered, the air was colder than usual. Valerius stood before a large screen, which was frozen on a single, damning image. The moment Leo had stepped back from their embrace, the human's expression soft and questioning, his own posture uncharacteristically unguarded. Explain this, Valerius commanded, his voice devoid of its usual grinding calm, replaced by a sharp, crystalline edge. He did not turn around. Kaeli single quotes S logic centers raced, searching for a viable explanation that was not treason. It was an analysis of a common human social ritual, a hug. I was assessing its nonverbal communicative properties and physiological impact. You were assessing nothing. Valerius spun, his form seeming to sharpen with fury. Your biometrics showed a pattern consistent with cognitive dissonance and emotional resonance. You were not analyzing a variable logistician. You were being compromised by it. The human is not a subject for study. He is a pathogen, and his continued presence has been deemed a threat to the structural integrity of this outpost. The words landed with the force of a physical impact. What is the directive? Kellen asked, his voice dangerously level. The human is to be detained and transferred to a long-term observation facility for deep-level psychological deconstruction. His ship is being impounded. The cultural liaison program is terminated. Deconstruction. It was a clinical term for a process that was anything but. Leo's mind, his memories, his humming and his art, they would be taken apart like a faulty circuit, until nothing of the original person remained. A cold dread, an entirely new and terrifying emotion, washed over Kellen. It was illogical. It was irrational. It was the most powerful directive he had ever received. That is, an inefficient use of a unique diplomatic asset. Kellen argued, the words feeling hollow even to him. He is no longer an asset. He is a contagion, and you are showing symptoms. Valerius's silver eyes narrowed. You are relieved of your duties, Kellen. You will report to the med bay for a full cognitive evaluation and recalibration. That is an order, recalibration. The erasure of deviant thought patterns, the death of the curiosity, the silencing of the echoes. It would mean returning to the silence, but now knowing what he was missing. It would be a fate worse than decommissioning. Kellen stood frozen for a nanosecond that felt like an eternity. His entire existence had been built on following directives. To disobey was not just a crime. It was an ontological impossibility. It was to cease being Xylos dot, but to obey was to betray the warmth, the connection, the first real meaning he had ever found. Acknowledged. Preceptor, Kellen said, his voice a perfect, emotionless monotone. He turned and walked out, his steps measured and precise. He did not go to the med-bay. Instead, he moved through the corridors with a purpose that was entirely his own. He accessed a secondary terminal, his clearance not yet revoked, and found Leo's location, the human's quarters, under remote surveillance. Kellen input a sequence of commands, creating a loop in the security feed that would show an empty, quiet room for the next 20 minutes, that when he arrived at Leo's door, he entered without chimming. Leo was on his feet instantly, the relaxed demeanor gone, replaced by the alertness of a man who understood danger. Kellen, what's wrong? They are coming for you, Kellen said, the words feeling alien in his mouth. Valerius, you are to be taken, deconstructed. I have been ordered to undergo recalibration. Leo's face paled. What does that mean? It means they will erase him from my mind, Kellen said, and the raw, unfiltered truth of the statement was a pain more acute than any physical wound. They will erase you. The two men stared at each other in the sterile room, the gulf between their worlds collapsing into a single, shared precipice. What do we do? Leo whispered. Kelly in single quotes S mind, trained for complex logistical problems, presented a solution. It was the most illogical, irrational, and treasonous plan imaginable. There is a maintenance conduit. It leads to a secondary docking bay. There is a courier vessel. Its launch would be logged as a routine supply transfer. He looked at Leo, his silver eyes blazing with a new, fierce light. We must go, now. It was not a request. It was a statement of fact. It was a choice. Without another word, Kellen turned and led the way into the dim, cramped accessways of the ship, the arteries hidden behind the perfect gray walls. Leo followed close behind. They moved in silence, but it was a different silence than before. It was a shared, terrified, and exhilarating silence, filled with the unspoken understanding of what Kellen had just sacrificed. His career, his people, his very identity, all for an unauthorized emotion he could not even fully name. They were rebels now, fugitives, and as they fled into the dark, hidden heart of the Xylos Empire, the only thing guiding them was a flaw in the algorithm that had become more important than the entire program. The courier vessel was a speck of dust against the immense, structured darkness of the Xylos outpost. Inside, the silence was thick with the hum of life support and the echo of treason. Kellen's hands moved over the controls with an efficiency that was now entirely self-directed, plotting a chaotic, unpredictable course away from Xylos space. Leo watched him, seeing the tension in his shoulders, the focused intensity that was no longer in service to an empire, but to their own fragile survival. "They will track us," Kellen stated, his voice flat. "The energy signature of this vessel is known. They will calculate our most probable trajectories, so we go somewhere improbable," Leo said softly. He reached out, his fingers gently brushing Kellen's arm. The touch was no longer a demonstration. It was a comfort, an anchor. Kellen didn't flinch. He leaned into it, a minute pressure that spoke volumes. For days, they existed in a liminal space. The courier shipped their entire universe. They talked, not about diplomacy or logic, but about themselves. Leo spoke of growing up on Earth, of the smell of rain on dry soil, of his family's laughter. Kellen, haltingly at first, began to speak of his own upbringing in the creches of Xylos, the endless cycles of training and optimization, the profound, unacknowledged loneliness of a life without connection. He was learning the vocabulary of his own heart, and Leo was his patient, gentle translator. Their shared glances grew longer, filled with a warmth that defied the cold vacuum outside. One evening, as the ship drifted through a quiet sector, Leo was humming that same old folk tune. Kellen listened, his eyes closed, not analyzing, just feeling the strange, beautiful ache it created in his chest. "It sounds like belonging," Kellen said, the words a quiet revelation. Leo looked at him, his eyes soft. "It is." He reached out and cupped Kellen's face, his thumb stroking the high ridge of his cheekbone. Kellen's silver eyes fluttered open, wide with wonder and a trace of fear. He brought his own hand up, covering Leo's, his touch hesitant at first, then sure. Their foreheads touched, a Xylos gesture of unity he had never found meaningful until this moment. Infused with a human tenderness, it was a silent promise, a new directive written not in code, but in the space between two heartbeats. Back on the outpost, the chaos was anything but silent. Preceptor Valerius stood in the command center, facing not a human enemy, but his own people. The news of Kellen's defection, and the reason for it, the corruption by human emotion, had not remained contained. Jorah, the data sifter, had accessed the security logs. She had seen the embrace, and instead of reporting it, she had shared it. The image, the story, had spread through the lower tiers like a virus. Whispers became questions. Questions became debates. A group of junior logisticians had openly questioned the preceptor's decision to sentence Kellen to recalibration. The perfectly ordered machine was developing a conscience. "This is anarchy." Valerius's voice chimed with a shrill, fractured quality. "You are questioning millennia of proven structure for a malfunction. We are questioning its cause," Jorah said, her voice surprisingly steady. She stood before him, no longer looking at the floor. "Logician Kellen was our best. If he could be so fundamentally altered by this malfunction, then perhaps it is not a flaw. Perhaps it is an upgrade our system has needed for a very long time." The argument raged, not with weapons, but with ideas. The concept of choice was debated in the mess halls. The value of individuality was analyzed in the training modules. The Xylos Empire was experiencing its first revolution, and it was a revolution of the heart, sparked by a single, forbidden romance. Weeks later, their courier ship drifting near a neutral trading post, Leo and Kellen received a tightly encrypted, non-traceable transmission. It was from Jorah. "The preceptor has been relieved of his command," her message stated. "The council is reconsidering. The new prevailing argument is that a system that cannot adapt to new data is a system destined to fail. They are drafting a new charter, one that includes concepts of personal autonomy and diplomatic re-engagement." There was a pause. "They want to talk. They want you to come back." Leo looked at Kellen, his hand finding his. "We don't have to. We can keep running." Kellen looked at their joined hands, then at the stars, then back at Leo. The fear was still there, but it was overshadowed by a stronger, brighter feeling. "No," Kellen said, his voice firm. "We are not returning as fugitives. We are returning as ambassadors." This time, when their ship approached the Xylos outpost, it was not met with a military escort, but with a single, unarmed shuttle. Preceptor Valerius was gone. In his place was a newly appointed delegate, with Jorah as his assistant. The meeting room was the same, but the atmosphere was utterly transformed. The new charter was everything Jorah had promised. It was a foundation for a new galactic union, built on equality and the acknowledgement of diverse forms of intelligence, including emotional intelligence. We have redefined our understanding of strength, the new delegate said. We see now that our laws of war were a failure of imagination. You have shown us a new way to be, a stronger way. As the official talks began, Leo and Kellen stood for a moment alone on a quiet balcony, overlooking the star-dusted expanse of the nebula. It's beautiful, Leo murmured. Kellen looked not at the nebula, but at Leo. Yes, he said, the word carrying the weight of a universe of new meaning. It is, he leaned in, and this time, the space between them closed not as an experiment, but as a choice. The kiss was hesitant, a conversation between two different languages finding a perfect, universal translation. It was not a conclusion, but a beginning. The war was over. A new, more beautiful and complex union had been born, not from conquest, but from the simple, illogical, and undeniable power of a love that had redefined the laws of an empire.